Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and you are participating in the Achieving Inclusion Summit. I'm so delighted that you have said yes to your own development and to be introduced to people maybe you have not met before, and ideas that will help you achieve inclusion in your organizations. Now, as you probably know, there are 3 tracks in the summit this year. So we're doing some conversations focused on avoiding fatigue, diversity fatigue, inclusion fatigue, belonging fatigue, what causes fatigue, and how do we either avoid it or recover from it. The second track that we're focusing on is confronting racism and really looking at not just what causes racism, but what are some specific tips and ideas that you can use to interrupt or end racism or the effects of racism. And then the third track is about measuring progress, and not so much the detailed equations and what you actually should put into a spreadsheet, but what are some of the factors that you want to keep in mind as you're building and growing and evolving your DEI initiatives, and also as you are encouraging people to get involved. So if just in case this is the first session in the summit that you are participating in, don't forget that you can find all of the sessions. And if you need links to them, you can go to achievinginclusion.com, where we will have a page, where we have a landing page that reminds you of how to access all of the sessions. In this session, I am smiling really big because I get to talk to someone who is both a colleague and a friend, and someone who has been doing this work for decades and doing the work in many different ways. His name is Elmer Dixon, and he is the president of Executive Diversity Services. But as we talk, you are going to find out a lot about him that you might not expect from someone who is the president of an internationally recognized diversity and inclusion consulting firm. So, Elmer, let's bring you on in here. Hey.
Hey, I'm here.
So, I could introduce you. But I have learned that when people who introduce me, who've known me for 20 years, they know too many stories. So I'm consciously choosing not to introduce you because it's too tempting to tell like my funniest story about Elmer and right and then 15 minutes will be gone. So why don't you start with highlighting maybe 2 minutes or so of what you think is really important for people to understand about who you are and what Executive Diversity Services does.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, Tracy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on this podcast. I I come from a kind of a different background into the field of DNI. I grew up during the 1960s during the civil rights movement. I often tell people it was an era of assassinations. I grew up in what we would call a melting pot neighborhood of so much different diversity, which really was preparing me, unbeknownst to myself, years later for the work that I would end up doing. When I was 17 years old, I actually became a founding member, co-founder of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. Um, and that consumed the next 14 years of my life. And it was part of the development because as a member of the Black Panther Party, we initiated the Rainbow Coalition, which was the phrase was coined by Fred Hampton, who was a member of he was the head of the Chicago chapter. But that kind of foundation, it all culminated when the two women that started EDS, I was an EEO officer at the time, um, uh, had become aware of some work that I had done for the park department, protecting women, by the way, from harassment. And so they asked me to become part of the company. And here we are some 30 years later. And we've been in business now for 36 years doing this work. So I'm currently, for the last 12, 13 years, president of Executive Diversity Services. And we do a lot of work around developing cultural competence, helping organizations become more inclusive and equitable through a variety of content. We've trained globally, we've trained across the United States, and it's been quite a journey. So that's kind of the basics of what we do, and a little bit about myself.
So when I knew that I was wanting to focus on this whole concept of diversity fatigue or people getting burnt out from doing this work, because sometimes it is really, really challenging emotionally as well as physically,
Mhm.
and that organizations also they get burnt out. And I was like, who do I know who's been in the business, who's been in doing this work for 20, 30, 40 years? And I thought, of course, you were one of the people that I thought about. And I love that you mentioned that you were one of the co-founders of the Black Panthers in Seattle, because the work's not exactly the same, but you have had to morph and change and adapt your commitment to equality and to equity in so many different ways over this time. So we're going to dive into this idea of diversity fatigue in a minute, but I want to get something out of the way. Okay, so just hang with me for a minute. I want to get something out of the way because you mentioned the Black Panther Party and you mentioned all of what you're doing now, but you've got a book coming out this summer. So let's talk about the book for a couple of minutes and then we'll go into what we do in the workplace now and corporations. So tell us about Die Standing and what the premise of the book is and what you're most proud of about the book that's coming out this summer.
Well, the title is, complete title is Die Standing, from Black Panther Revolutionary to Global Diversity Consultant. And it really is the journey of my life developing and coming to the point where I am today. And you mentioned about, a different approach. Certainly it's a different approach, but it's all about human justice. When you look at equity, when you look at inclusion, it's about treating people fairly. It's about making sure that people have the opportunity to succeed and pursue, their dreams and their goals. And that was our foundation as members of the Black Panther Party, of which we were actually the first chapter outside of the state of California and the longest lasting chapter. But it chronicles that journey and how they're all connected, those different portions of my life. And so I moved from the streets, working in the community as an activist for those years, into the boardrooms and C-suites, helping leaders figure out how to lead companies more inclusively and equitably. So it's that journey, and it chronicles how I went through processes to get there. So it's like the struggle continues. We often say we find different ways to have an impact and to approach the work. I guess the biggest difference, Tracy, is that we didn't seek to be paid when we were Panthers and never got paid. Now, where our work is, it's highly sought after, and we get paid to do the kinds of things that we love doing. So it's very gratifying just to see us change companies and organizations, and you've been part of that change.
Well, I love that you say that about, getting paid and being compensated, because when I left corporate America, right, in terms of being employed full time by one corporation, I purposely said, what would I be doing even if I were not paid for it? What kind of work is going to make the kind of impact in the world that is important to me, and that also allows me to use my talents and in a very productive way. And so I see, that pattern not only in me and in you, but in a number of people who do this work, that if they had a different job, they would still be doing this work. They would be finding a way to make an impact or to have some kind of leadership contribution.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the question. If we move into this idea of fatigue, people do get burnt out, and it's understandable why. It's hard work.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you personally maintained your energy, your commitment, your effectiveness doing this work for cultural change in the world? Like, you personally, how have you done that?
It's really an interesting question, and I think it's a deep question because, people are often told, as they're pursuing a career, to do what makes you happy or to do something that gives you satisfaction. I think you mentioned it yourself. What could you do that you would continue to do whether or not you got paid or not? And I think the thing that has sustained me and continues to sustain me is that it's my heart work. It's my life work. It's what I was put on this, I believe, I was put on this earth to do. And so at those times when there is fatigue, and of course we have to engage in personal self-care, Tracy, you know this. It's important for us to get away for a minute. Go take a vacation, take a break, explore the world, or whatever the case may be, whatever else gives you joy. But I think the main thing that keeps me going and energizes me is that it's the work I love doing, because I believe that we're making a difference. That even in an organization where there's strife, or there's people that aren't they're not sure about changing their own behaviors, if you find just a small percentage of people that are open, that are willing to say, I'm going to make a difference in my company or organization, then we've done our job. And that's the gratifying piece, is the turnaround. Let me tell you a story. Tracy, I think you worked on this contract with us. We trained 19,000 flight attendants across the globe for a major U.S. airline, and working with so many thousands of flight attendants with our work and our concepts. I eventually continued to fly that airline. I'm a million-mile flyer on that airline. And 10 years or so after we had completed the training, I was boarding a plane, and the flight attendant said to me, I know you. And I said, yeah, okay. I said, I guess I know you too. And then she said to me, does the difference make a difference? And this is one of the tools that we teach in our training. And here it was 10 years after we had done this training, and boom, she remembered that. And so that's the thing that keeps me energized, is the fact that people remember those things and they try to use them in their life. They try to use them in their work. I work with a guy in France who's an expat from the U.S., and he lives in the south of France. Dr. George Simons is his name, and he trains all over Europe. And the guy, I call him the Energizer Bunny. He's 85 years old, and he still goes at it. Why? Because it's in his bones. It's in his DNA. And if you believe in it, if you believe in the things that you are teaching and training, a little burnout doesn't matter. You do self-care. You go do some things that give you joy outside of the work, and then you go back at it again. But that's how I've maintained.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, because there are so many times when I find myself going back to, well, there isn't anything else that's more important. And I have skills, I can do a lot of different things, but it's like, no, this is important. And then I have to pace myself in order to, if I realize, okay, you've been really pushing it for too long and you're burning out. And so I think that's really important for us to, share with people that you can be frustrated. You can be tired. You can be discouraged. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the wrong thing. In fact, it probably means you're doing the right thing, and you're facing resistance, and you're educating, and it's like, oh, it's an indication that I need to keep going. But I talk to clients sometimes, and I'm sure you do too, who feel frustrated and they are ready to quit. And mainly what I hear is not just that they're tired, not just that it seems too big or that it'll never change, but that they're not seeing enough progress in the organization where they are. So what advice would you give to someone if they, reached out to you next week and they were like, I love this work. It's my life's work, just like you. But this organization I'm in right now, I've been there 5 years and we're just not making enough progress fast enough.
Yeah. Well, Tracy, one of the things that we always tell people in our work is that cultural competency is a journey. It's not a destination. We're not going to land someplace and all of a sudden it's all fixed. I think when we first started doing this work, at least for me, and when I started working with EDS back in the late 1980s and early 1990, I used to think that by the year 2000 we'll have the world fixed. And then, of course, I came to my senses that there's a lot of work to be done. And here we are in 2023. And, sometimes it feels like we barely scratched the surface. But I look back on those examples like the United Airlines. I said their name, but I look at the example of the flight attendants and other examples that I've had along the way. And know that we have succeeded. There's other organizations that are going to hesitate, that are going to backslide. And I think my statement to folks who begin to get discouraged is, well, sometimes you can only take an organization so far. If you feel like you've taken them as far as you can take them, and maybe it's time for someone else to pick up the ball, then maybe move on to another place to do your work. But again, if it's in your DNA, if you really feel it, when you think about the rights of people and individuals, the right to exist and be who they are, for people to love who they want to love, whatever the case may be, if that's in your DNA, you're not going to drop it. You're going to continue on with it. And you may have setbacks, but setbacks are fine. The thing is to always remember that this is a journey, and it's an ongoing journey. It will continue. And so when I work with clients, I only try to take them as far as they are willing to go. I can't take them where they don't want to go. If they want to be led through a process, one of the clients that I can mention, U.S. Gypsum, and Tracy, I believe you worked with us on that contract at various stages. And they were an example of having the right things in the right place at the right time. Here was a company that was 100 years old when we started working with them at the close of the millennium, here in 98, when we first took their executive team away. 12,000 employees. Their leadership team was 30 people. And on that leadership team, there were no women and no people of color. But they realized that because they had a CEO, a committed leader at the top, who had 2 young daughters himself, his wife had just passed away of cancer. And he said he was not going to run a company that when his daughters became old enough that they couldn't get a job, in the executive positions. So he was committed. And with that commitment, we launched through a series of work with them over a 12-year period. And when we pulled away from them in 2010, they were driving the ship. And in 2017, they got the highest recognition from an organization called Chicago United for having the best overall D&I strategy, and got an award for it. Invited us back to it, helped to join them when they accepted the award. But we realized that they did the work. The honor was theirs. They did the work. They took the journey. We just helped guide them along the path. And so when there's organizations that are committed like that, and as you know, doing this work, there are organizations who want to just talk the talk, but not walk the talk. And so you choose your battles, but don't let them discourage your dreams and your goals. If an organization's not willing to go that length, and if you happen to be working for them, maybe it's time to move on and find another path, at least another organization where you can make a difference. But don't burn yourself out over someone who is, just not going to take the journey with you. I don't believe in wasting my life in that kind of way. I'm going to take them as far as they want to go. And if they don't want to go any further, then I move on to the next client.
Yeah, you bring up 2 or 3 things that I think are really important. One, that the work can take different forms at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so a big part of it is, have you laid a foundation that you can build upon? And sometimes I know I have worked with some clients where they did not build a really solid foundation. They jumped in and they did a whole bunch of things, and then you know it kind of went dormant for a while, and then they wanted to come back and have a lot of visibility again. And it was frustrating for the folks who were internal. But then the second time around, they built a much stronger foundation that even when they backed off a little bit, a couple years would go by and they could build on the foundation that they had started. And then I think you also make a really good point that for some people, like for each individual, only you can know when it's time for you to leave
Mm-hmm.
versus take a deep breath, refresh, get some help, and go at it from a different angle. And that get some help phrase, I think, is critical because often I've experienced that often people who are either, maybe they're on a DEI council, or maybe they're leading up an employee resource group, a business resource group, an employee group in a large organization, and they're working so hard, but they don't get help. You gotta get help. You've got to engage people internally and look outside for help. And while I love that they might hire, me, or hire you, or hire somebody who's out there in the world of consulting, you can get a lot of help from other people without hiring a firm, like by using your networks, by really reaching out to other people who are doing the work. Because if your company is not hiring a consulting firm, you still need an external perspective.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
don't
think the basis of having a successful program is, as you said, is building the foundation, but also having a comprehensive strategy. So a comprehensive approach that really looks at all of the different variables and angles, and people need to look deeper than they're used to looking. The companies that do a check the box approach, they're the ones that are always revisiting it another, 5 years down the road, or 10 years, however long it is, because they haven't built the foundation. And this is not a check the box issue. You can't say, okay, racism's done, sexism's done. It's not that kind of a proposition. You have to build the foundation where all of those things matter consistently. And that's really what I try to help clients understand, is that these things need to matter all the time. They don't matter in the moment now because it's an issue now, or it's the hot thing. They need to matter all the time. And for anybody that's doing this, if you're internal inside a company, it needs to matter to you all the time, or else maybe you're in the wrong job, you're in the wrong function. Maybe you need to move to something else. You need to ask yourself that question: does this matter to me all the time? I don't get a moment off. I don't get to step outside and say something that's racist or homophobic, or because I don't believe those things. I don't have that opportunity, and I don't want it, because that's not who I am. And so you have to ask yourself, are these things important to you all of the time? Does it matter that women no longer should have to perform in a man's world in order to succeed? Can she be who she is? Does it matter if someone is non-binary? Can they still succeed in your organization? Does it matter if someone, a person of color who may have been ostracized because their style is different, for them to succeed in an organization and allow them to be who they are? Does it matter? Those are the things that create inclusion. That's when you, in fact, take the advantage of the diversity that difference brings to a company. You want to be the best, you have to make sure that everybody else has that opportunity as well.
Yeah, I was recently speaking in a showcase, and the conversation that came up around inclusion and how it's different. Inclusion, some people think, well, inclusion is means that everybody has their own way, like you make different rules for different people. And it's like, no, that's not what it means, right? It means that you actually tap into and recognize all the diversity and create policies and systems and activities and programs where all that diversity can work together to achieve the common goal, right? To achieve the mission of the company, to beat your numbers from last year. But by doing that, by making sure you are maximizing the productivity and the creativity and the innovation and the ideas that come from bringing all kinds of different people together.
And Tracy, that is exactly where that question always comes back to. Does the difference make a difference? So it's not about anything goes, but if people are able to achieve the mission, the goals of the organization at or above standard without a negative impact on cost or safety or legality or productivity, then it is not a difference that makes a difference, and it needs to be included. That's the big challenge.
I'm laughing because right, you're talking and I'm going cost and safety and legality. And I'm like, oh, okay, it is in my head. It really is in my head. So we're laughing about that, but there are people like, how did they both know that? Well, yeah. So a lot of times, companies will just do training. But one of the things I've been impressed with executive diversity services is that you actually give people what you refer to as tools, but they're things to remember and to implement. And so, as our time begins to get short, we've probably got about 6 more minutes. Um, I think one of the things that does decrease the tendency for burnout is when you give clients something that goes beyond just offering training.
Oh, yeah.
So, would you be willing to share 3 or 4 of the tools? Like, is it a difference that makes a difference? What else really stands out to help organizations and the leaders of DEI initiatives not get to fatigue?
Well, you see, again, laying this foundation, Tracy, I think it's so important that they begin with some sort of an assessment, and gauging where their employees are, where their policies and procedures are, where they are as leaders in the eyes of others, and identifying then where are the pressure points. Because if you can identify the pressure points, as you said, it goes way beyond training, and it's developing inclusive leaders within the organization. And so that does take study and work and training, but it also translates into best practices within an organization. So you come up with a list of, that's what we did with USG. What are the best practices? What do they want to achieve? And we helped them identify them. And they worked over a number of years to achieve those best practices. And so it's beyond, it's like your recruitment and your hiring. How have you gone deeper beyond just the surface of unconscious bias, but how do you look deeper? So why do you react in a way where when you interview someone and you've thought you've done all of your homework, but you still don't give this qualified person the job? And I'm going to end with a story. I was working with a senior leader. He was a senior VP at USG. And one of the things they had identified was to increase the amount or the number of diversity represented at the senior levels in this company, director level, without any affirmative action or EEO type of program. And so they revamped the recruitment, they revamped the interview process, and they were hiring for a high level director. And a woman, a Latinx woman, had come through the process. She was a Harvard MBA, graduated the top of her class, had all of the high recommendations and past credentials, and she landed in the top three along with two white gentlemen. And so the senior VP was convinced that she was going to get the job because he had looked at her credentials and resumes. And when the process, that last final process ended, and she was not referred for the job, he called me into his office and he said, "Hey, Elmer, we went through this process." And he said, when I asked them why she wasn't referred, they couldn't tell me other than there was just something about her. And it was the right fit. Her communication style was different when they dug down underneath and found out what it was, the way she communicated, the way she would go about doing things differently than the way they were used to. And they didn't ask, is it a difference that makes a difference? And so it's in penetrating, these layers of bias, whether conscious or conscious, in every practice in the company. That's how you keep focused effort, is you address each area that needs to be looked at that can impact inclusion either in a negative or a positive way. And there's plenty of work that companies can look at, can do in order to engage outside of the training room, but to use these principles and processes that we teach so that they can become the organization that they want to be. But you have to be willing to go the journey, because training in and of itself is not the answer.
Yes, yes, yes.
And he became the CEO, by the way, and accepted the award on stage at the program in Chicago for Chicago United.
Yeah, I love that we're slowing down a little bit and talking about this. It's one of the reasons why I host the summit every year and do free webinars every quarter, once every quarter, because all of us who did this work need the reminders. All of us who did this work need to be reminded that if we don't want to burn out, we've got to lay a good foundation. We've got to assess where we're going. We've got to do training, yes, but we've got to give people tools. And then we have to follow the implementation.
Yes.
Because that's where the rubber meets the road.
That's exactly where it is.
So I've put up on the screen, if people want more information from you or more information about the work that Executive Diversity Services does in the world, they can go to executivediversity.com and get all the information as well as ways to contact you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we'll remind people that Die Standing, from Black Panther Revolutionary to Global Diversity Consultant, is coming out this summer. Look for it over the Juneteenth weekend, and then you should be able to find it anywhere you buy books.
Excellent.
Thanks so much, Elmer. And everybody else, I just want to remind you that just like talking to Elmer Dixon and now, throughout the summit, you will be able to talk to, listen to, learn from a wide variety of people on 3 themes. On this theme, avoiding fatigue or recovering from it, confronting racism, and measuring progress. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm so glad that you're participating in the summit. And if you have any questions, just go to achievinginclusion.com and we can respond to your questions there.